Hey dudes, and welcome back to the Bantz. As always, I am your host, the Bantz. And once again, it's another Monday, the beginning of the week, so it's time for our first What's Happening in Fashion this week, so let's just get right into it. And of course, guys, I do want to start off with an apology today. Sorry for not uploading any videos last week. Unfortunately, my physical health ended up getting the better of me, and I just wasn't able to do much, really. But we're back at it now, so thanks for putting up with me. And with that said, let's move on to our headlines for the day. And in our first headline of the day, YouTube Sneaker News just put out a very nice and very intricate interview slash kind of overview with creative and former shoe designer Ari, best known for his Ari Menthol 10s, which is exactly what this video is about. He goes into the history of it and kind of a little bit of the history of himself and then everything that happened afterwards. So if you're a sneakerhead and you're not aware of this shoe, I definitely recommend watching this video. Very cool overall, and shout outs to Sneaker News for bringing it back to light over a decade later. And in our second headline of the day, brand Advisory Board Crystals just released their new collection, so let's give it a look. So for those of you unfamiliar with ABC, let me give you a quick introduction. Basically, they've been around for a relatively short time, less than 2 years now. And what they are basically is what some would argue a contemporary brand, which is mainly focused on the idea of, you guessed it, crystals. They are actually so heavily influenced in the idea of crystals that they actually sell crystals in their web shop. Yeah, really. But going back to the collection at hand here, I think they did a pretty good job overall, as they usually tend to do. Starting off with what they're kind of mostly known for, which is their graphic tees. The designs here, pretty good overall. The quality of the shirts looks great as per usual, and they used a decent amount of color and everything as well too, so I have no reason to complain. But where we really get to see the brand shine in its fullest is in the other pieces of apparel, their pants and their jackets and their pullovers and things like that. Starting off, they had some really nice choices in some of the textiles they decided to use here, but then even moving off of that, some of the smaller detailings here, like some of the zipper aesthetics or the clear pouches or even the buckles they used on a couple of these pieces, it's just really interesting overall. And really, these small details are what makes ABC just so interesting, and you can really see that in their more bizarre detailings. The two that really stand out to me are, one, the jacket liner that has the Wikipedia page on crystals on it. Even though it is kind of dumb, it is still kind of funny, and it's still a very interesting take on what a jacket liner should be. And of course, the other, which how could I not talk about this, is the pullover that actually has crystals shown into it, and just the different paths going off of it, kind of explaining a little bit more about it. I mean, who thinks of these things? But even with all my praise of this brand, there is some shortcomings here. First off, it is way too expensive for what it is, no matter how interesting it is. And even more important, I guess you could say, is that it is very popular and very hard to get. Not only is this collection entirely already sold out, but even getting it is never easy. They almost never put anything up on their web shop. It's almost like a more difficult Cactus Plat flea market, if that's even believable. But once again, as always, good job to ABC, and I can't wait to see what you guys put out next. Alright, and with that, let's move on to our art stories for the day. And first up, artist Ari Menthol showed off his newest tiger people blocks, which are these nice little hand-painted wooden sculptures that he made. And honestly, all I gotta say is, if you're maybe looking for a new, interesting, little colorful toy to add to your collection, I would definitely check these out. Then artist Vernon O'Meally showed off some of his newest works from his newest exhibit in NYC, and personally, I love these. They kind of remind me of a mixture of graffiti-inspired designs mixed with something that Ryan McGinnis would do, and if any of that sounds interesting to you, I would definitely give these photos a look. Otherwise, if you happen to be in New York anytime soon, definitely check out the exhibit. Then artists Jean Nagai and Kelly Ording sat down with Juxtapose for an interview about some of their newest works and their newest exhibits. So if you're interested in seeing some more of their work, which personally I find very interesting and a little bit calming, I guess you could say, or just knowing more about their kind of styles, I would definitely either give these photos a look or give the interview a read. And lastly, artist Madsaki just had his newest exhibit open in Thailand recently, so if you're a fan of the guy or want to learn more about him, I would definitely check out some of these photos as well. Alright, and now moving on into our fashion stories for the day. Polo by Ralph Lauren just showed off their limited edition CP93 collection, and honestly, I think this is absolutely fantastic. The idea of this collection is obviously derived from when Ralph Lauren sponsored the America Cup, the sailing competition back in the early 90s, and if you couldn't tell, it definitely shows. But I really have to say here, as far as all over prints go, I think these are some of the most interesting I've ever seen, mainly because even though they are all over prints, they don't necessarily feel like all over prints. They almost feel like paintings on top of clothing, just in a very nicely done style. And even though one could argue that there aren't necessarily a lot of different prints here, the fact that they are able to push them onto so many different mediums of clothing, whether it be a jacket, a polo, a pair of pants, a hat, or anything else, really makes me respect this collection a little bit more than what you'd see from your average designer. So if you find yourself a fan of nautical themes, or maybe just a really nice all-over print that you haven't seen before, definitely check out this collection. Very worth looking into. And speaking of all-over prints, actually, Playboy and Freak Store came together for their newest collaboration, and I think this one is actually very well done too. For as much props as I just gave to the Polo collection for taking the all-over print and minimalizing it, I have to do the exact opposite here and give Freak Store praise for taking the all-over print and absolutely just maximalizing it to shit. And I do mean that in a good way. For as eye-catching and trippy as these pieces are, especially the colored pieces, they still feel clean. They still feel vibrant without going over the edge, and that's not really easy to do. So if you have been looking for some nice short sleeve summer button-ups that are all over printed or vibrant or just pop, and you don't mind the Playboy aesthetic, these will definitely be right up your alley. Then brands Loewe and Paulas came together for their newest spring-summer 2018 collaboration, and honestly, I think it's pretty amazing. There is just so much going on with this collection. There's reconstruction in here, there's plenty of abstract contemporary, and you could even argue that there is some avant-garde in here as well too. And their use of just so many different materials is just crazy. I mean, we have denim, we have leather, we have rubber, we have silk, we have light cotton, we have felt, and whether or not you'd wear it, because God knows I fucking wouldn't wear it, you still have to admit that sequence piece, that sequence top, absolutely fantastic. Really, if you consider yourself a fan of design and aesthetic and really kind of pushing the limits of what can be done with clothing and still keep some level of wearability, then definitely check this out. Some very inspirational pieces in here. And lastly, brand Ader Error showed off their Spring Summer 2018 collection, and at the very least, it's interesting. So starting off, let's just get this out of the way. I do think that the lookbook itself is very well done. This kind of idea of having a photo gallery in somebody's phone, it's not really been done before to my knowledge. I'm sure it probably has, but I haven't seen anything at least this nice, this clean, so first off, props for that. But now moving on to the collection itself, I have to be honest here, personally, I'm not really a big fan of it, and I'm sure plenty of you can understand why. It's not my style, it's definitely not my aesthetic, and it really kind of feeds off of what's in now, unfortunately. You can definitely see that it takes a lot of inspiration from the Vetements and this London UK rave scene revival that's been going on a lot lately. And with that said, you might be wondering then why I'm reviewing it if I don't like anything about this whole style or aesthetic. And the reason why I'm still reviewing it is because I still think it's somewhat interesting. But what I find that's interesting here isn't what you'd expect. It isn't the colors or the materials, the textiles or the silhouettes. No, what I find interesting here is the aesthetics and just the little details. Like the accessories feel like something that you'd expect maybe Ambush to make. Some of the little rips and tears and patches here and there are very playful and make for a more interesting piece or outfit. And some of the little stitching ideas they had, be it on a back pocket or a shirt pocket or an embroidery that's pinched on the front of a piece. Very interesting ideas and some things I've never seen before, even if they kind of break down the utility of the pieces. And if there is one other thing I like about this collection, which puts them on a much higher level in my book compared to Vetements, is the fact that this collection actually feels cohesive. Like as I said, I'm definitely not a fan of either this Vetements-esque or this rave revival-esque style, but the fact of the matter is they put them together and they mesh them well and they make an entire lookbook and an entire season out of it, and for that I have to give them at least kudos. So if you do find yourself a fan of either of these styles, or maybe just a fan of those smaller little details that are a little bit more on the inspiring side, either way, I'd at least give this lookbook a once over. There is some interesting things in here. And lastly, let's move on to our articles for the week. And first up, Hypebeast sat down with former journalist and creative consultant Eugene Tong about how he feels how social media has changed fashion as a whole. And personally, I think it's a very interesting read. Definitely has a lot of history and knowledge behind what he says. So if you're interested in reading a little bit more about those aspects, I definitely check this out. Then Vox wrote a very in-depth article talking about kind of this idea around how brands just kind of steal and copy each other all the time, and how copyright law works in that effect or how it doesn't work in that effect. And so if that idea is very interesting to you, kind of this idea of how brands get away with knocking each other off or making fakes in general, then I definitely give this a read. Then Heddles did a nice little piece on the history of the ball cap, and of course if you are a fan of history of fashion, or especially accessories and history of those, then I would definitely check this out. And finally, Grail did another history of this time on brand Hender Scheme. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about them and kind of the way they do things or why they do things the way they do, then I definitely give this a look as well. Alright guys, and with that we come to the end of our first whiff for the week. As always, I hope you guys have enjoyed, and also as always, if you want to read any of the articles I talked about today or look into a little bit more of the lookbooks that I wasn't able to show photos of, I've linked everything in the description down below. And if this is your first whiff, then welcome. We do these twice a week on Mondays and Fridays. So if you're a fan of it and want to see more, feel free to subscribe. Otherwise, if you do have any questions, comments, or concerns, or even just want to talk fashion in general, feel free to hit me up in the comments down below. I'm always willing to talk fashion. And with that guys, thank you once again for watching these videos and supporting my content. I hope you have a couple good days until I see you next, and as always, until next time.